Hello and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger. Joining me on this show is Supervisor Darren Spellman of District 5. Darren, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Joel.
Pleasure to have you on. I think we've probably chatted at least 3 or 4 times over has it been 3 years now?
Yeah.
So you are coming toward a new election cycle. Mm-hmm. You're almost done, well, not almost done. You're 3/4 of the way through your first term. And how's it been going for you?
It's been going fantastic. Better than I could have expected a year ago.
What are some things about being a supervisor that you really had no idea you were in for, that now that you're somewhat of a seasoned veteran, you understand?
I wasn't quite prepared for the idea of having to mitigate internal conflicts from an administrative level. I mean, we have a CAO that takes care of that in department heads, but sometimes supervisors, just by way of what goes on, have to play a role in that, and that's been an interesting subset of my responsibilities.
Do you feel like at this point you really have a grasp of what it takes to be a good supervisor?
I do, and since, like I said, about a year ago, as of the last election, I feel some sense of normalcy finally, and that comes from having mutual respect among my colleagues on the board.
We had a big shift in the board recently in the last election with 3 new board members coming on, which really is a non-very common thing.
Yeah.
Comparing the last board to this board, how do you feel in terms of how well the board works together?
Well, the board, I wouldn't say the old board was dysfunctional, but the new board works well together much more often. And I'm very pleased with it.
Why would you say that's the case?
Well, one case and scenario is, there's 5,300 people that live in Rancho Calaveras, which is the largest area in my district, and they had no public transportation for decades that I know of. They attempted it a few times. But with the previous board, I couldn't make any headway. They really wouldn't recognize or be cognizant of the fact that there were needs there. But with the new board, Supervisor Ponte, Supervisor Edson, who sit on the COG, the Calaveras Council of Governments, they've approved an extended route that allows people in my district to have public transportation, which is definitely needed. And
beyond that, there's some permanence to these bus stops, right? Funding's been approved?
That's correct. Supervisor Ponte and Edson on the COG approved the route, which is the transportation component. But then the entire board voted 5-0, including myself and Chair Callaway at the time last year, and Supervisor Wright. We all voted in favor 5-0 to finance bus shelters, which adds permanency and the ability for folks to get out of the rain or the heat, whatever the case may be, and also to be Americans with disability compliant, which is an important thing.
So some progress in District 5.
Absolutely.
Very nice, very nice. There are so many important issues, and I want to touch on a bunch of different things, but I think first and foremost, the county is facing what looks to be a difficult budget situation.
Sure.
For those who just aren't familiar with the county at all and how it works, can you explain the role of the supervisors and what we're looking at with this year's budget? Okay.
Well, for the untrained eye, which mine was a few years ago, so for people at home, I have complete sympathy. There's money that we have control over and money we don't. Our budget last year was just over $100 million. The Board of Supervisors has discretionary powers with about 55 to 60% of that $100 million. And even within that 55 to 60% that we have discretion over, we're talking about sheriff's deputies, we're talking about legal counsel. I mean, those aren't things that you can just decide that you're not going to fund. So when you break it down to what actual wiggle room you have in terms of staffing levels, it does become quite difficult, especially because we've had year-over-year decreases in staff.
So the board is responsible for kind of distributing the general fund, is that correct?
This is true.
Okay, and you guys talk about it in a preliminary budget, and then you continue to get more reports back from the CAO, who kind of runs the county as an administrator and advises the board, right?
That's true.
And then at that point, it really comes down to you and the other 4 board members to decide, okay, we have all the information, and this is how we're going to spend the money.
Correct.
So what are we looking at this year?
They're projecting that the shortfall this year won't be as large as it was last year. However, it is very significant, and we'll be hearing about that shortly. And there isn't going to be one silver bullet solution to how to get through this difficult time. There's going to have to be multiple pronged approaches to it. There's going to have to be possibly some unfilled vacant positions, maybe even some trimming of positions. There's going to have to be, what we're hoping for is an increase in assessed values for homes in the county. We know that the surrounding counties, the values of homes have gone up significantly in double digits over the last couple of years. So we expect that we will see some of that increase that will help offset some of the costs for us as well.
You mentioned that there was a shortfall last year. What was the shortfall last year in the budget?
Just the overall decrease in the amount of revenues that we have coming in.
But like a number, I mean.
Oh, $7 million.
Okay, and then this
$7 million.
year it's projected to be between 4 and 7, is that correct?
I think this year they're projecting between 3 to 5.
Between 3 and 5 now?
Right.
Okay, so
but
it's
we just
decreased.
got some new numbers. You know, they have quarterly numbers that come in, and we're going to be talking about the latest numbers, I believe, at our next board meeting. So.
Now, in last year's budget, how did the board end up deciding to meet that $7 million gap, which is pretty significant?
Right. There were some positions that we didn't lay anybody off last year, but there were positions that went unfilled. So if somebody retired, if somebody decided, there was one gal I'm thinking of, for instance, who her husband got a job somewhere else, and she moved with her husband or family, and they left that position unfilled. So there's some cost savings there where we didn't have to lay anybody off last year. We're hoping that we won't have to this year. I mean, we've got to the point where the numbers of people that we have working for the county, there's really not a lot left that you can trim to be able to provide adequate services.
So last year, most of that deficit was met in large part with one-time funding, is that correct?
That's correct.
How do you feel about spending one-time funds that were really designated for something else on meeting a budget deficit gap?
Well, the one-time funds that we use come from a fund called Teeter, and that would take too long to go into right now. But basically, it's a fund that the board has discretion to use as they please. Historically, we've used it to pay for procurement of technology, new computers, new software, copy machines, those type of things, electronics. Those are fairly expensive and not something that you have to buy every year, but something that you know is coming down the road. So what they did was they took money from that fund last year, from the Teeter Fund, which is typically used for technology upgrades and those type of things, and they used it to fund general fund needs.
Which are ongoing positions, so you used one-time dollars to fund ongoing costs.
That's true.
How do you justify that?
Well, there's a couple ways you can look at it. I had a gentleman ask me that question shortly after the budget happened. He said, I can understand how you could approve that. And so my question to him is, what would you have me cut? So from my perspective, I've always said that law enforcement and public safety is number one. And anything else besides that is on the table in terms of my opinion or where I'm coming from. So this year, though, that wasn't a viable option. The only two options that we had before us this year were to not give the sheriff the funding that he needed in order to have a more balanced budget. It wasn't going to be balanced anyway, no matter what we did. Even if we didn't use the one-time funds, it still wouldn't be balanced. Well, it was balanced, but not with revenue, not this year's revenue. So the option was to not give the sheriff what he needed, which was more officers to patrol, or to pass a budget based on one-time funds, hoping for the best for the next year and being creative and giving the sheriff what he needs. So if in the best case scenario, in a perfect world, the board would have sat down, made some very difficult decisions about what they were going to cut in order to keep the sheriff fully funded and meet our obligation to try to have a balanced budget based on our revenue sources. But that wasn't available. So the choice I had was to support the sheriff, which is my number one goal. And to do that, I had to vote with my colleagues to pass a budget, even though I didn't like it, based on expenditure of one-time funds to the tune of several $1 million, which is hard to swallow. But what I looked at was what was going on in Congress last year with the fight over the debt ceiling and all of these things that were going on, and it was just, nothing was happening. People were highly upset. I mean, the approval rating for Congress was at an all-time low. I think it was like 6% or something. It was crazy. And so I was looking at the scenario we were in, and even though I didn't like it, something had to be done. And I think I wasn't the only one that felt like that. I know that the other supervisors aren't spendthrifts, they aren't drunken sailors. It's something that weighs on all of our minds.
Looking toward this year, you've stated that you're willing to spend one-time funds again as part of a package to try to balance the budget again.
Correct.
Once those one-time funds are gone, which you've admitted you've agreed, you voted yes to spend one-time funds on ongoing expenses.
Right.
Once those are gone, what happens?
Once those are gone, then people are going to have to make the really hard choices. We're making the semi-hard choices now, and they'll have to be faced with some very, very difficult choices.
And what does that mean? People would probably have to lose their jobs?
I think that would be one of the things that would have to be on the table, unfortunately. And I hope that we don't have to go there.
Okay. But like you've said, you haven't painted any picture of another way to make this budget balance, even if you spent the full. Do you have $3.5 million of one-time funds left in Teeter?
I don't think so.
How much do you have?
I think we have around $2 million right now. I'm not sure of the exact number. But
Okay, so let's say it's $2 million. You spend all the $2 million in one-time funds. You have positions where people leave, and you don't kill the position, but you don't fill it again. So you
Right.
save some money there, maybe $500,000. So we're at $2.5 million. Let's say it's $5 million budget deficit. You're only halfway there. How are you going to meet that this year?
Well, historically, you have to look at what the board's done in the past. And there have been times, I mean, Calaveras County's been around since 1849, I believe. So it's certainly not unprecedented that they've come up in situations like this. And from what I understand, from what I've researched and been told and looked at historically, is that when they come up short like that, where there's no other options available, then they will borrow money to be able to balance the budget.
So that's another thing you might
That's
have to
another
consider.
option.
Okay.
Again, it's not a very promising one or one that makes anybody excited.
You had mentioned that the way property values are in this county is something you take certain issue with. Could you give me some details on that?
The gold standard for determining assessed values of property is called the Case-Shiller Index. They do metropolitan indexes throughout the United States. It's been in existence for many, many years. It's what the Dow Jones investment banks rely on to determine, values in general for metropolitan areas. So when you look at that and you see, that Calaveras County, you have the Bay Area, then the Valley, then Calaveras and the foothills, we have a lot of second homes, retirement homes, things like that. So we're always behind the curve. But if you look at historically what's happened, it's cyclical. In the last 2 years, San Joaquin County, Stanislaus County, and Sacramento County, 2 years, year over year, have had double-digit increases. So if they increased by 20% last year, which actually Stockton increased by about 27% last year, then it would only be logical based on historical cycles that we should be appreciating at maybe 15% if they were at 27 last year, even though that was last year, so you give us a year to lag behind, and maybe we're not 27, but maybe we're 15. So those types of numbers can help us get back to where we need to be to have sustainable levels of revenue. But that's just one key component.
But what has happened in terms of the value of properties in Calaveras? Have they gone up according to the assessor or no?
This is the first year since I've been on the board that she projected an increase in the market value of homes, and she pegged that at 0.4%, which is not even half of 1%. To me, that's a failure on her part,
and the reason it's
not representative of what truly exists.
And the reason that's important is that a big chunk of general fund money comes from property taxes.
Absolutely, we've got $3 to $4 million less in our budget now than we did in 2008. Okay. So that's a big chunk. I mean, that alone could set us straight. But obviously we know that the values today are not what they were in 2008. So that's not going to happen. However, they are not representative currently of what the real values are. Anybody that's opened a newspaper and looked at how much houses are selling for in the last 9 months can tell you, they've been extremely surprised at how fast the prices have been raised.
Have you raised this with Assessor Leslie Davis?
I have, and she doesn't appreciate my opinion.
Okay,
We'll just say that.
What does she say?
She has her opinion for how she determines those. One of the things that she does, which I find egregious, is that she'll take a home that, say it was a foreclosure. When the people left, they were mad, upset, they lost their house. So they ripped all the cabinets out, they took all the washing machines, the dishwasher, all the appliances. And maybe, because it's been sitting there for a while the bank was deciding what they were going to do, maybe some unfortunate individuals came by and took away the copper wiring and all kinds of other things. So it becomes an issue where the bank is trying to get it off their hands and it's almost a fire sale. It's definitely not representative of what the real true value of that property is. So if she's basing, which is what she's doing, she's instructed her staff to take the lowest home that's sold in an area, and that's usually a foreclosure where it's been stripped out, and they will take that number for however much it's sold for, divide it by the square footage in the house, and then they'll get $1 per square foot rating, and then they'll draw a geographic area, which is a neighborhood or something, and they'll apply that $1 per square foot rating to all the homes in that area, regardless of whether or not the neighbor down the street has a custom home with granite counters. So it's definitely, I think it's very lazy on her part. She's not using, I know she's an intelligent woman, and she's not using the skills that she has. She's not applying herself in the way that everyone would like to see her do.
Is there any chance that this could be changed through your action or the board's action, or?
Well, I seriously doubt that, because Tom Tryon was quoted in the local newspaper 2 years ago as saying that she was single-handedly destroying the county's budget. And that was public front page. So I think that he made his point in terms of his opinion on what she's doing to the county budget. But it doesn't seem to faze her. Well, this is an election year, so we'll see. But, people aren't real excited about raising taxes. People are probably happy that their property taxes are a little bit lower.
Got it.
So.
Speaking of election years, your term's going to end at the end of this year. Mm-hmm. Have you come out and declared your intent to run?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how's it going so far? How do you feel about the upcoming election?
It's going very well. It's going very well. Had a lot of positive feedback from people that are happy, they're excited. Some people were concerned because I had a rough start when I became supervisor, that maybe I might have had enough and throw in the towel after the first term. I can't say that the thought didn't cross my mind at some points. However, with the election of 2012 and some fresh faces on the board, some turnover in key positions at the county in terms of departments or administration, things like that, it's a much rosier picture for me. I've been able to accomplish a lot more things and just have a better general good feeling about things than I had before, and I'm actually enjoying it a lot. So,
you had spoken about kind of how well the board is working together,
Mm-hmm.
and compared to the last board.
Right.
One thing was surprising to me that happened, I guess it's two or 3 weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
which was, according to historical tradition, you were in line to be the board chair.
Correct.
And what looked like happened was you kind of got passed over.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really understand why that happened. I was wondering if you had an explanation for that.
Well, historically, the vice chair assumes the chair position the next year. You're correct, that's historical, but when you look back, it hasn't always been that way. There have been aberrations. This particular instance, Supervisor Edson, who made a motion to nominate Supervisor Ponte as chair, when asked about his reasoning for that decision, he stated that because of Supervisor Ponte's previous tenure as mayor of Angels Camp, that he thought that she was probably the best person on the board to lead us in this year, which everybody agrees could be quite tumultuous with the budget. Mm-hmm. So although I wasn't expecting that outcome, when I rolled into the board meeting that morning, I was expected to be nominated chair. So it was a surprise. However, I could understand his reasoning for that, and it's something that I'm willing to take as his honest opinion, and no disrespect to me. So, and Supervisor Wright said, if we get through this year and everything goes well, you get reelected, I'll nominate you for chair next year. I said, okay, fair enough.
So in a way, maybe it's nice to not have to be the one leading the board through such a difficult year.
It is nice. It is very nice because I watched Supervisor Toffanelli last year, in 2012. He was board chair during his election year. It's very difficult. He endured a lot of ridicule from people that came to the public podium and had their 3 minutes of fame and used it to paint him in what I think sometimes were not representative of the person that he was. And it put him in a precarious position, to not want to shut them down from talking to give them their time to speak because it would look like he was self-serving. But at the same time, I think anybody else who was chair probably would not have allowed that to be endured, some of the slanderous things that were levied against him. So from my perspective, it was a little bit of a burden off of me in that regard.
You've never been one to not be thought of as someone who's willing to say something controversial.
Sure.
And I think you've been consistent with that all the way through. So you're not afraid to speak your mind.
Right.
One thing that you said recently at a school board meeting has certainly generated some controversy.
Right.
And this was regarding the death of Layla Fowler, an 8-year-old girl in Valley Springs, who was allegedly stabbed by her brother Isaiah. However, that's still in court, so we don't know, whether that will be proved to be true or not.
Right.
However, at that school board meeting, I was hoping you would just let people know what your intent was, even though what you said may have been taken in a negative way.
Sure. The intent was to allow the school board to realize that there was public discontent about the way they conduct their policies and procedures in hiring. It was a known fact to school district employees, multiple employees, that the Fowler young man who served was in prison for his 13th birthday, locked up on murder charges, which is very unfortunate for a lot of different reasons for a lot of different people. It's a known fact that he was documented to have committed acts of aggression against fellow students at the school site where he attended school, and that he had committed heinous acts against domesticated animals. That's a psychology 101 factor, where you look at someone that's abusing animals, they usually move on to humans. And that's, so what I told the school board was, look, the meeting was about approving a teacher to be hired as a counselor who had no counseling credential. The teacher is a fine teacher, someone I used to work with on staff when I was at the high school. In fact, I consider her a mentor. She gave me a lot of good help when I was there. She taught honors history, which is a very difficult thing to do for very high achieving students. So no doubt she's a great teacher. But they hired her to be a counselor without any kind of counseling background or any kind of certificated accomplishments in terms of college classes or courses taken that would allow her to say that she was adequately professional to be giving counseling advice. So what I advised the school board was that, look, in light of the recent events, knowing that this young man had issues and somehow ended up in this particular situation with alleged murder on his hands, as a trustee, if I were you, I would be trying to hire more counseling staff, or at the very least, if I couldn't afford to hire more staff, make sure the ones that I had were properly credentialed for a number of reasons that are obvious. So that perhaps we might be able to avert any of these things in the future. So how they took that was that I was levying some kind of blame on them for the...
But do you blame the school board and who they hired for failing this young man and perhaps causing this murder?
No, absolutely not. Okay. I mean, I don't think... I mean, that would be up to a court of law to determine if they had any culpability. However, I was not levying any blame, and I don't levy any blame now. It's just that when you look in the news, you watch television, and you see a school shooting or a stabbing or some kind of thing that went on, almost without doubt, it always comes down to that the person had a mental health issue that wasn't addressed properly. So in my mind, the best way to prevent things like that from happening are to have people in place that can provide proper intervention. And in my mind, again, best practice for appropriate intervention is not hiring someone that doesn't have any credentials to be a counselor. To me, that's a tragedy waiting to happen that could be averted.
I see. Another big issue that the board is facing right now is the general plan. It's been a long time in trying to get passed. It still hasn't happened. And kind of making that process a little bit more difficult is that you've had a big turnover in people like planning directors. We
Right.
just had Tom Garcia, Public Works Director, go.
Right.
We have a county that hasn't really worked together as a cohesive unit for a long time. How do you meet these challenges as a board and as a county, and what's the status on the general plan?
The status on the general plan, according to Brett Harrington, the interim director, who is just departing, and we're going to have a new director starting at the end of this month, I believe, on the 28th. His direction to the board was that had Tom Garcia stayed, because Tom Garcia was working on the circulation element of the general plan, which is a large component that lawsuits are levied upon sometimes in terms of development. With the absence of Tom Garcia, he had a deadline for finishing it in July. Now he's saying in the absence of Tom Garcia that he believes that we can finish it by the end of this year. But, you know, it has been ongoing for a long time. He was very upfront and gave the numbers right out in public that $1.6 million have been spent so far without delivering a product. That is unacceptable, truly. I'm not a planner. I don't pretend to be one. I don't have those professional background skills. So for me, as a board member and my colleagues, we have to depend on the professionalism of the people that we hire. So I think that what you've seen is with the turnover in part is people that have been frustrated with the process and decided they wanted to take a job where it's somewhere easier. So
that kind of explains why people come in here and then seem to leave pretty quickly.
it's a difficult case because we only have one city in the county that's incorporated, that's Angels Camp. So technically all these places that want to have their own community plan standalone, legally that creates a very precarious position, because if you adopt policies for West Point and it's incorporated into the county general plan, that means that technically all places in the county, if it's in the county general plan and adopted, should be beholden to that. So that means you'd have people in Copperopolis to be beholden to things that were adopted for a community plan in West Point and vice versa. You know, so it just wouldn't really work for either community. I don't know why people have told these people otherwise for all these years. It seems fairly obvious to me based on very frank discussions we've had with our attorney, County Counsel Janice Elliott, and Brett Harrington, the interim director. It seems fairly obvious to me as not even a non-planning person that I think for political reasons or for lack of backbone, I don't know, people have allowed these people to believe that these community plans were going to be incorporated along with the general plan, and I just don't see that happening.
We're just about out of time.
Okay.
I want to give people an opportunity to contact you if they want to talk to you. Phone number?
209-380-1718.
And do you do email at all, or?
Email, you can look at my email on the county website, click on Board of Supervisors, and there'll be a drop-down menu and it has my email address on there.
Darren, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Very welcome. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Joel.
And thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.